Welcome to the first episode of Covid-19, the pandemic that changed it all. We find ourselves in a situation that none of us could have ever imagined, a situation that the world has not seen since the Spanish flu. I do not say that lightly either. It's not a comfortable realization to come to. In fact, it's disconcerting at every level. We have countries everywhere locking down their cities with citizens huddling inside of their homes in fear of going out and contracting COVID-19. With good reason, in my opinion. I have been watching this virus since the very first reports came out of China. Those reports talked about a viral pneumonia outbreak of unknown origin. In fact, the Chinese officials who arrived in Wuhan to figure out the cause of the outbreak even ruled out that it was a coronavirus. According to the Chinese Communist Party, the outbreak was nothing to be concerned about, and they even took it a step further by stating that human-to-human transmission was unlikely. In the days that followed, the world started to see another story start to unfold. A story that could have come straight from a Stephen King novel. In fact, this whole entire situation is eerily similar to what happened in The Stand. Obviously, COVID-19 is nowhere near as deadly as Captain Trips was, but the whole way the story developed in real time was eerily similar to what happened in The Stand. We will never know the real story out of China. We will never know how many people were truly sick or how many died. The Chinese government will make sure of that. What I do know is this. The numbers that China reported are false, and there is no chance in hell that they reflect the reality of what occurred there on the ground. I saw the footage for myself. I saw people being welded into apartments. I saw children screaming for their parents as their parents were dragged away by the CCP. And I saw children crying as their deceased parents and relatives were taken away to be cremated. For a time, people from China were regularly sharing the horror of what was occurring on the ground. For a time. Then, after a couple of weeks, after the Communist Party regained its footing, the crackdowns began. Doctors, journalists, and citizen journalists were all silenced and in some cases ended up missing. These are not easy things to hear or comfortable things to talk about. Unfortunately, this is reality, though. This is how the communist government of China deals with dissent, even when the fate of the world hangs in the balance. It is the dark heart of the abyss laid bare for all to see, and the picture it paints is not one to look forward to. The narrative being spun from Beijing is straight trash. Point blank, period. None of the numbers they have posted should be used when we look at the effects of this virus and how quickly it spreads and what the mortality rate is. Just like their currency, the Chinese government cooked the numbers in regards to the outbreak. A more accurate template can be found in Europe, and what is currently occurring there in places like Spain and France, and the most extreme case, Italy. Our societies in the West are very similar in how they go about their daily routines, and here in America, we were given a glimpse of our future if we ignored the warnings and didn't take severe precautions right away. Unfortunately, those warnings were mostly ignored, and now we are seeing the results of our inaction. The Western world was let down by politicians who were more interested in political points being scored. The alarm bells were being sounded for weeks. Yet those warnings were mocked by a legacy media that is so caught up in their own hubris and arrogance that they ignored what the doctors and scientists on the front lines were saying. Instead, they gave us generic advice, like wash your hands, or it's just the flu, bro. These sort of wisecracks when anyone brought up concerns about the obvious problem that was headed our way. Now, these same people are attempting to act as if we should listen to what they have to say. I will do no such thing. I will not listen to these liars when it comes to the safety and well-being of me and my family. I prefer to listen to medical professionals and those on the front lines in Europe and now here closer to home in America who are waging war against our own unseen foe, against an enemy that can't be confronted with tanks or bombs or a cyber attack, an enemy that has no regard for your socio-economical standing or your religion or what your skin color is or who you voted for. All of that is irrelevant in the face of the greatest threat we have seen in 100 years. Yet, our leaders and their friends in the media have no desire to show unity. They have no desire to be part of the solution. They are intent on being part of the problem. In tonight's episode, we will begin our journey with the very first international reports about a strange pneumonia that appeared in Wuhan. To understand what is occurring now, we must understand what has led us to this point. We will attempt to navigate those waters by starting with one of the very first reports that came across the wire that mentioned an unknown type of viral pneumonia that was breaking out in the city of Wuhan. Before we get to the article, I'd just like to thank you all for joining me for tonight's episode. I know that this is a tough time for a lot of people, not only in the United States, but all over the world. For those of you who are familiar with me and my work, I appreciate your support and for giving my new creation a listen. I don't take your time investment lightly. I do apologize that it has taken a week longer than I wanted it to take to release it, but we will be comfortably in our groove from here on out. Also, I'd be seriously negligent if I didn't add, Epstein didn't kill himself. For those of you who might not be familiar with my other work, my name is Bobbycapucci and I am based in Las Vegas, Nevada. I am the creator and the host of The Jeffrey Epstein Show. Our format on that show is to update the news about the Epstein case at least twice a day. If you haven't heard the podcast yet and are interested in government corruption, cover-ups, and any other twist or turn you could imagine, be sure to check that out as well. As for this podcast, I have not decided if it will be a daily occurrence or a few times a week. I guess that will depend on what you folks think. So if you want more content like what you're going to hear in this episode, please be sure to let me know that. If the interest is there, I will certainly consider moving to a daily update format that mirrors The Jeffrey Epstein Show. Now that you have a little bit of an idea of who I am and what my goal for this program is, let's dive into the very first article that mentions a viral outbreak in Wuhan, China. Our first article is from sciencemag.org. And this article came out January 3rd of 2020. So the first reports of there being a viral outbreak started to cross the wire on December 31st. And there was several different outlets in Asia that picked it up. And even a couple of Western outlets reported on it a little bit. So I decided to use this article because it's from sciencemag.org and it's from a science journal. So we're going to dive right into this article. And again, for those of you who might not be familiar with me and my work, this is how we do it. We jump into this article, and as I read it, I break down my opinion of the article as we're going through. So this article is from sciencemag.org, and the author is Dennis Normile. Update, January 6th, 8:55 a.m. Wuhan health authorities reported yesterday that severe acute respiratory syndrome and Middle East respiratory syndrome have now been ruled out as the cause of unexplained viral pneumonia that has sickened 59 people, according to the latest tally. No deaths have resulted so far, though some people remain critically ill. The Epidemiological Association of these unexplained pneumonia cases, with the wet market selling not just seafood but also some game food animals, strongly suggests that this is a novel microbe jumping from animal to human, says Yang Kwok Young, a microbiologist at the University of Hong Kong. Given China's advances in epidemiology, infection control, and laboratory diagnostic capabilities since the SARS outbreak in Asia in 2003, Yon says it is highly unlikely that this outbreak will lead to a major SARS-like epidemic, though we cannot be complacent. Screening in Hong Kong has turned up more than a dozen travelers from Wuhan suffering from pneumonia-like symptoms, although it's not clear they are related. Singapore found one such case. And you see right there from the very beginning, they weren't even thinking it was a SARS-related case. Either that or the Chinese government knew what it was and they were hiding it. And again, I know that's not comfortable for people to hear. And I want to make it very clear that when you hear me criticizing China, it is not the people of China that I'm criticizing ever. The people of China are amazing people. I'm criticizing their communist government, the people who have the Uyghurs in concentration camps and who organ harvest their own people who are political dissenters. That's who my ire is focused at. That is who I'm talking about when I say the Chinese government, not the people at all. Stoking fears that a novel virus may have begun to infect people, health authorities in the central city of Wuhan late on Friday local time announced they have documented 44 unusual cases of pneumonia, a sharp jump from their initial report of 27 cases on December 31st, 2019. Although the city is being praised for quickly sharing information, infectious disease specialists around the world are eager to get more details on the mysterious pathogen and the disease it produces in patients. In today's report, Wuhan officials ruled out influenza, avian flu, and adenovirus. They call the virus a viral pneumonia of unknown cause. Now, what we're going to see here is that the praise that's being heaped on the Chinese government, the CCP, is misplaced. Because the first cases of this broke out in November, and they knew they had something going on in they had something on their hands, and they didn't go into action. They didn't tell anybody. They acted like they were caught off guard as well. And you see, that's the problem with a government like theirs. The local government didn't want to report this up the chain because they feared that there would be repercussions. And as you'll see as the story goes along, and as most of you already know, there were repercussions. So that's why they didn't report it up the chain. And therefore, they tried to contain it locally, and we see how it just exploded from Wuhan. It just exploded from Wuhan, and it moved fast. The exponential growth rate of this thing is enormous, and the way it's growing on a daily basis, it's mind-numbing, and that's what makes it so dangerous. You can transmit it so easily, and people go around being asymptomatic for 2 weeks, not even showing symptoms, and they're passing it along to other people without even knowing. So it's one of those kind of diseases that can just catch up on you and catch you by surprise and really knock the hell out of your medical system. And we saw that happening in China, but again, they were not truthful. The narrative being spun by Beijing and picked up by the legacy media in the West, it's mind-boggling to see them do this. China is not an example for anybody to look towards and say, oh, all right, this is how we stem the tide. Korea is the gold standard. South Korea is the gold standard. If you want to look at how you stop an outbreak or how you contain an outbreak and you don't overburden your medical system, look no further than South Korea. China is not the place to look, folks. It's the Chinese government's fault that this outbreak has reached a pandemic stage. Hints of trouble first surfaced publicly on 30th of December when a directive from the Wuhan Municipal Health Commission asking hospitals to report unusual cases of pneumonia was reported by local media. In the next article we're going to read after this, you'll see that when you go back and look, the first cases were actually reported November 17th. And that's what we're going to do on the podcast here. We're going to read these articles and we're going to let them sink themselves with the misinformation and the BS and the misdirection and it's just the flu, bros. And I'm going to establish for you that not only did the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, lie about this whole entire thing, but that the media carried water for them. And that's almost as bad, if you ask me, because look, let's be real. Nobody expects the Chinese government to be upfront about the numbers. I mean, they cook the books on their monetary system. They're going to be upfront where they're going to lose face when it comes to an outbreak like this. Everybody who knows anything about China understands how important face is in China. It's almost a currency. So if you think that the people at the local prefecture or whatever you want to call it, I don't know what it is, a state or a province in China, whatever it is going to report this up the ladder, well, you know what they say about the messenger who reports bad news to the king, right? Chop off with his head. And China is exactly like that. You'll see as the story goes along, if you haven't been following it, you'll see that just about everybody in Wuhan that was involved in this got sacked by the central government because the central government can't take any responsibility whatsoever. So, of course, they cook up weird, crazy conspiracy theories. They blame the local politicians. They blame the people. Meanwhile, you got the Communist Party living the high life still, hiding out wherever they were hiding out while this whole entire outbreak was raging through their population. And they have the audacity to get on their soapbox and preach to the rest of the world and try and throw mud at the rest of the world at this point. Come on. The Chinese Communist Party must be held responsible for their part in this, for their willful ignoring of what was occurring in Wuhan for basically a month and a half. The next day, the commission posted a notice in Chinese on its website stating that a number of local hospitals had reported cases of pneumonia linked to the wholesale Hunan seafood market. If you're not familiar with what the wet markets are, they're all over China, and they're places where people go to shop, right? They have like live animals, chickens, fish, pangolins, bats, you name it, all sorts of crazy shit. Look, I'm not here to disparage their diet, right? It's, every culture has their thing. But these wet markets are very unhygienic. Nobody washes their hands. They don't use gloves, none of that. So they'll be feeling on a bird, then they'll feel on a pangolin, and it's just a whole entire free-for-all. And it's just a petri dish for viruses and bacteria to thrive. And these kind of markets are where people in China go to get their food. And they're not very regulated. I mean, they're supposed to be. But again, what the Chinese government says they're doing and what they actually do are two very different things. So these markets aren't very regulated, and you don't know where this food is coming from. You don't know if it's been tested. Most of it hasn't. They don't have an FDA there. They don't have anybody to ensure food quality. None of that. So these people are eating these animals that are coming in from the wild, and they're containing God knows what sort of disease. The commission had turned up 27 cases in the city of 11,690 kilometers west of Shanghai. 7 of the patients were in serious condition, 2 had recovered and were nearing discharge, and the remaining number were stable. All patients were isolated and their close contacts were under surveillance, the notice stated. Again, too little, too late. There was already a silent outbreak underway in China at this time. This was November 17th. Again, I keep referring to that date, and bear with me if you're not familiar with this timeline. In the next article I'm going to read on this episode, we're going to do 2 articles tonight. It's going to show you what I mean about November 17th and why that date is important to what I'm talking about here. At that time, no human-to-human transmission had been identified. Again, can we trust that that's the case? Because we had doctors ringing the alarm bell. I forget his name, the ophthalmologist who was Feng Lang Wei, something along those lines, who rang the alarm bells and told his colleagues and was in hot water with the Chinese government. Well, he ended up dying from this. And he was the one that was ringing the alarm bells and saying this was a lot worse than the government was saying, and that people were in bad shape, and that Wuhan was in bad shape, and that it was a serious outbreak. And instead of the Chinese government kicking it into action and praising this man as a hero, what do? They censor him, they pick him up, and eventually he ends up dying from the very disease he was the first to tell about. The very man who rang the alarm bells. A hero, folks. A genuine hero. A modern-day hero, and he should always be remembered as such. And once again, the Chinese government does what they always do, and they tried to put a muzzle on him. They tried to scare the story out of existence. Hell, if you can just, intimidate the story to go away, it'll go away usually. But guess what? This is a virus. It will not be intimidated. It will not be scared. And you cannot lie that you are not still in an outbreak. You can't blame foreigners coming in, that you're saying it's new transmissions are all brought in by foreigners. It's just a lie, okay? It's just a lie, and we can't stand for it in the Western world. We can't stand for China being such liars in this situation. It is very important that we understand what occurred. It is very important that we understand that China, the government of China, again, remember, because the people of China suffered even more than the rest of us because of their government. They were in the epicenter of this all. And their government knew in November what was occurring, and they let their people suffer through just to save face. So the government of China needs to be held responsible for their part in all of this. Now, at the same time, as you heard in my opening statement, believe me, I'm not giving the Western powers a free ride either. They were ill prepared for this. And in fact, they downplayed it. We could have been prepared. We could have been ready. But no, they downplayed it at the highest levels. From Trump on down, all the way down to people like Hannity and Ben Shapiro. And they're not alone. Plenty of left-leaning outlets were downplaying it too, with it's just the flu bro stuff. And now that it's a big deal, all of a sudden, all of those same outlets are talking like they're the authorities on this. One thing that we've learned throughout this, and one thing that we're going to learn going forward, and we're going to remember after all of this, is who dealt us straight and who BS'd us. An additional 121 close contacts of patients are under surveillance, although the Commission has so far ruled out human-to-human transmission. Again, in my opinion, obviously I can't prove this, but in my opinion and from China, the Chinese government's track record, that is also a lie. They knew what was up. The city has shut the seafood market according to local press reports. The quick response and public notification is obviously progress for China, says Guan Yi of the University of Hong Kong, an expert in emerging viral diseases. Yeah, that's because everybody was going on the notion that the outbreak had just started, right? Okay, well, at this point in time, I could understand why people were praising China, especially after they covered up the SARS outbreak in 2003. So it looked like progress, right? People were like, all right, China's doing the right thing here. They're helping out the rest of us. They're letting everybody know, they're ringing the alarm bells, and the world can be prepared. But in reality, this had been going on for about a month and a half before they even lifted a finger. China had been criticized for its slow action and lack of transparency when severe acute respiratory syndrome, SARS, caused by a previously unknown virus, emerged in 2002 in southern China. In response, it beefed up disease surveillance efforts. Spotting the linked pneumonia cases shows the benefit of a surveillance system, Guan says. Again, a surveillance system is awesome. You need that, especially when you're talking about emerging viruses, novel viruses, hot viruses, tropical viruses. You need that. But the people who are in charge of that need to be trustworthy. They need to have credibility. I refuse to take what the people who are harvesting organs from their own citizens tell me. I refuse to take what they tell me at face value. The Chinese government cannot be trusted when it comes to this, especially. Again, we see it right here. We just said it about how they covered it up in 2003. It's the same people in control, folks. The same people who were running the government then are running it now. Meet the new boss, same as the old boss. Spotting the linked pneumonia. At any time during the winter, he notes every big city hospital is likely to have dozens of pneumonia patients, making unusual cases hard to spot. That is definitely a fact as well. That's the truth. Because there are always, complications during winter. You have people with the flu, etc., etc. And I'm sure they have their own local outbreaks of diseases and conditions in Wuhan itself, right? So, of course, you have to think that, man, there's a lot of pneumonia cases, but you're not thinking that it's anything untoward, perhaps. And that could be definitely what was occurring if it was, a group that wasn't the Chinese government that we're talking about here, especially considering that the doctors and, were ringing alarm bells. The people localized were talking about something really weird going on, but yet the government downplaying it like it's no big deal. It's just a viral outbreak. Oh, it's not SARS or coronavirus. You heard it here in the article yourselves, folks. I'm not putting words in their mouths. This is what they said. Guan says there are unconfirmed reports of a mother and her son contracting the same illness, a situation that would have stood out and was, perhaps, something that caught the Health Commission's attention. Guan, who is not involved in the investigation in Wuhan, says this does not necessarily involve human-to-human transmission. The son reportedly ran a stall at the implicated seafood market, and his mother frequently visited him there. They could have been exposed to the same pathogen simultaneously, he says. Sure, that could definitely be the case. But when we're dealing with the Chinese government, unfortunately, we have to look deeper all the time. We have to make sure that we're not taking what they say at face value, and we have to explore everything because they have a track record, folks. They have a track record where all they have done since their inception pretty much is lie. And that's the unfortunate truth about the government in China. Local media have reported that some market vendors also sold live animals, including birds and snakes, and the organs of rabbits and other wildlife, raising concerns about a zoonotic pathogen jumping to humans. Rumors had circulated online claiming that this could be the return of SARS, a zoonotic disease that spread to 37 countries, infecting more than 8,000 people and causing 774 deaths before it died out. Boy, we almost wish it was that at this point, huh? This is SARS-CoV-2, and this is a nasty son of a bitch. This virus is a nasty one, folks. A very, very, very nasty virus. And it's one of those creepers. So, again, it was very important for China to be up front from the very beginning. That's how we find ourselves where we are now. And to understand how we got here, we have to understand where we were. And as the podcast continues and we continue to read articles, you'll see how I pivot from the Chinese government and taking a closer look at how they've conducted themselves. I'll pivot towards the Western governments. And like I said, they have their own things to answer for when it comes to this case. But right now, at the beginning of this story, we have to focus on the Chinese government and their inaction and what they did not do, as opposed to all the praises that are being sung by them, mainly by their own disinformation people that they've inserted in the media. You know, their narrative that they're pitching, folks, that's BS, okay? What do you think? That it's not state approved when you have people in China talking about how this is the U.S. created virus and planted in Wuhan? I mean, really? The Chinese government can squash that in 1 second, but they let it run. It's because they like that kind of stuff. They understand that disinformation is one of their biggest tools, and they use it in every single instance, even when we're talking about something as serious as this case right here. Even when we're talking about a pandemic, a worldwide event, the government of China would rather lie than lose face. The disease was traced to a novel coronavirus that had mutated as it jumped from bats to civets sold in live animal markets, where a few people picked it up and transmitted it to others. There was no vaccine and no effective treatment for SARS, aside from supportive steps such as mechanical breathing support and the administration of steroids to reduce lung inflammation. Boy, does that sound familiar, huh? And this is like the older, bigger, badder brother of SARS at this point. The mortality rate isn't as bad, but the way it's transmitted and how quickly people catch it, it's a doozy. Guan, who played a key role in unraveling the source of the SARS virus, says the recent pneumonia patients are apparently responding to standard supportive treatments, so I don't think this is SARS. Given that suspicions center on the fish market, authorities should work to dig out the zoonotic source, Guan says. And again, this is a professional saying this, a man who works in Hong Kong, who is in charge of infectious diseases, and he's going off what the Chinese government is giving him, the information. And the information that the government was giving him led him to believe that it wasn't SARS. Now you have a professional who is being hoodwinked by the Chinese government as well. So you think the rest of the people of the world are going to be able to know that this is more serious than they're letting on? People didn't start to understand how serious this was until we saw people showing up in hazmat suits spraying aerosol cannons all over the place. Then people started taking note. People started saying, what the hell is going on? It wasn't because the Chinese government came out and said, hey, everybody, this is serious business. We don't know what this is. We need help. Can the CDC come help us? What about USAMRIID? What about the Infectious Disease College? Can we get some help here? None of that occurred because they were trying to cover it up. That's where the evidence leads you. If you follow the evidence, that's where it leads you. Local media reported that Wuhan authorities arrested a number of individuals for allegedly spreading unverified information online, causing an adverse social impact. Imagine that. And that's what I'm talking about. Those were all doctors, folks. Those were all doctors talking about all of this before the Chinese government said one word to the rest of the world. How could anyone believe what the Chinese government says? How can anyone believe that narrative? It is false. It is false, false, false. And these articles establish that. These articles prove that. And going forward, the reason why we're starting here is so that you understand why we can't listen to the Chinese now, and why their numbers that they've reported should hold no bearing on what we do and what our strategy is to combat this virus. Aside from the notice posted by the Wuhan Health Commission, little, if any, additional information has been released, and the dearth of details is frustrating scientists both in China and around the world. An official of the Beijing office of the World Health Organization told the South China Morning Post that WHO is closely monitoring this event and will share more details as we have them. The WHO office did not immediately respond to a science request for an update, and the WHO is another organization that needs to shoulder a lot of this blame. They did not take this seriously from the very beginning. They didn't take this seriously at all, and they're still giving bad advice, in my opinion. I don't even bother listening to the WHO anymore. I don't even bother with it. I'll read what they put out, but mainly when I'm reading about this and I want to know exactly what's going on, I search out accounts from doctors on the front lines in Italy, doctors on the front lines in Spain, doctors where this is blown up, epicenters, and where they're battling this and where they have experience battling this and where they can give you firsthand accounts of what's going on, accounts that I trust. I can't trust, and I do not trust anything coming out of China. Even the other scientists and scientists in China were upset that the data wasn't coming out quickly enough. And that's because China had to save face. They had to save face around the world. And they figured, guess what? If we're going to go down, if our economy is going to tank, so is yours. We do not know if influenza tests were performed or if tests for SARS or coronavirus are underway. Marjorie Polak, a moderator of the Program for Monitoring Emerging Diseases, a widely followed internet service tracking infectious disease outbreaks worldwide, wrote online. More information on this outbreak, including demographics of cases, possible known common contacts, and a clinical description of the illness would be greatly appreciated. That's the WHO basically begging China for them to share information with them. Okay? That's the WHO begging China to share information with them. And China has the audacity to come out and try and blame anybody else or, point fingers anywhere else. You see, this isn't about the blame game, folks. We're all in this together. And the Chinese people just as much as the rest of us. But the Chinese government's playing dangerous games right now. And they're not only playing games with their own people's lives, they're playing games with our lives and our loved ones' lives. And the narrative that their water carriers in the legacy media like to spit and they like to spin, well, that's not going to be acceptable. That's not going to go unchallenged. And I'm not going to sit back and let that narrative run when I know it's obvious BS. And you'll see that it's obvious BS. You'll see that they established a pattern of lying from the very beginning in this next article. So this next article is from the South China Morning Post. Headline, Coronavirus. China's first confirmed COVID-19 case traced back to November 17th. There's that date again. Remember, I said that date was important earlier, and this is why. This is why it is important. The first case of someone in China suffering from COVID-19, the disease caused by the novel coronavirus, can be traced back to November 17th, according to government data seen by the South China Morning Post. Well, isn't that nice? Isn't that nice? Government data. So they had it documented that the first case was all the way back on the 17th. But they didn't share that with nobody. Nobody knew a thing until December 31st. So what took so long? Was Communist China waiting for a big grand announcement? Were they waiting till they had more information? Or were they just lying to the rest of the world? This article was written by Josephine Ma. Chinese authorities have so far identified at least 266 people who were infected last year, all of whom came under medical surveillance at some point. Some of the cases were likely backdated after health authorities had tested specimens taken from suspected patients. Interviews with whistleblowers from the medical community suggest Chinese doctors only realized they were dealing with a new disease in late December. Scientists have been trying to map the pattern of the early transmissions of the COVID-19 since an epicenter was reported in the central China city of Wuhan in January, 2 months before the outbreak became a global health crisis. Sorry about that, waiting for the article to reload here. Understanding how the disease spread and determining how undetected Understanding how the disease spread and determining how undetected and undocumented cases contributed to its transmission will greatly improve their understanding of the size of the threat. According to the government data seen by the Post, a 55-year-old from Hubei province could have been the first person to have contracted COVID-19 on November 17th. From that date onwards, 1 to 5 new cases were reported each day. By December 15th, the total number of infections stood at 27. The first double-digit daily rise was reported on December 17th, and by December 20th, the total number of confirmed cases had reached 60. On December 27th, Zhang Jingzhang, a doctor from Hubei Provincial Hospital of Integrated Chinese and Western Medicine, told China's health authorities that the disease was caused by a new coronavirus. By that date, more than 180 people had been infected, though doctors might not have been aware of all of them at the time. Well, we know that as of December 31st, they said that it wasn't a coronavirus or SARS. We established that in the other article. So they came out right out of the gate and they said, oh no, it's not SARS, it's not a coronavirus. Right out of the gate. Instead of just saying, hey, look, we don't know what this is, we need some assistance from the outside, let's all work on this together and figure out what's what. Nope, they decided to do it on their own and be secretive about it. By the final day of 2019, the number of confirmed cases had risen to 266. On the first day of 2020, it stood at 381. While the government records have not been released to the public, they provide valuable clues about how the disease spread in its early days and the speed of its transmission, as well as how many confirmed cases Beijing has recorded. Scientists are now keen to identify the so-called patient zero, which could help them to trace the source of the coronavirus, which is generally thought to have jumped to humans from a wild animal, possibly a bat. On the first 9 cases to be reported in November, 4 men and 5 women, none has been confirmed as being patient zero. They were all aged between 39 and 79, but it's unknown how many were residents of Wuhan, the capital of Hubei and the epicenter of the outbreak. It is possible that there were reported cases dating back even earlier than those seen by the Post. Folks, look. The Chinese government knew something was going on. They knew something was going on. And they understood that whatever it was bad. They lied, and they kept secrets, and they didn't provide information to the world, and now we're in the position that we're in. You add all of that up with the ineptness of the leadership in the West and how we were so poorly prepared to face something like this, and you have the perfect storm for disaster. Let me be very clear, folks. This is not the Chinese people's fault, okay? It is the Chinese government once again playing games. The Chinese government once again not caring about the rest of the world and only worrying about keeping power in their own country, only worried about projecting power on the geopolitical stage, even in the face of such a crisis as COVID-19 ravaging through their country. According to the World Health Organization's website, the first confirmed COVID-19 case in China was on December 8th, But the global body does not track the disease itself, but relies on nations to provide such information. Again, when we have to rely on nations to provide the information, they have to be transparent with things like this. And China has not been. A report published in the medical journal The Lancet by Chinese doctors from Jinintan Hospital in Wuhan, which treated some of the earliest patients, put the date of the first known infection at December 1st. Dr. A. Fen, the first known whistleblower, told People magazine in an interview that was later censored that tests showed that a patient at Wuhan Central Hospital was diagnosed on December 16th as having contracted an unknown coronavirus. Okay? Do you understand what I'm talking about now? How this just in 2 articles. We've been together for 40 minutes and I've shown you how the Chinese government likes to lie, how the Chinese government likes to F around when it comes to things like this. And that's why it has me so hot and why I decided to start the very first episode right here on this topic. I wanted to establish going forward why I am so adamant about not using anything that comes from China when it comes to numbers. Now, am I saying that the medical advances coming out of China are crap? No, I will not say that. They have very, very talented doctors in China, very talented medical people. Their medical apparatus is not third world by any means. Their infrastructure, their medical infrastructure is very good. The doctors are well trained, they're well versed, and they're prepared to go the extra mile. We've seen that time and time again in China. The problem lies at the top. The problem lies with the bureaucrats that are censoring the doctors. The problem lies with the local tough guy who shows up and beats the doctor senseless because the doctor tries to, let his colleagues know what they're dealing with. That's the problem. And these Chinese doctors, let me tell you about bravery. You want to read some stories of bravery if you're not familiar with what they've done and what they did when this all first started? Take a look and a gander at the way they conducted themselves, because these Chinese doctors, they're right up there with all the other doctors that battled this. They're heroes. Accounts by other doctors seem to suggest the medical community in Wuhan became aware of the disease in late December. Previous reports said that although doctors in the city collected samples from suspected cases in late December, they could not confirm their findings because they were bogged down by bureaucracy, such as having to get approval from the Chinese Center for Disease Control and Prevention, which could take days. They were also ordered not to disclose any information about the new disease to the public. Does it need to be any more clear to you what occurred here? How this all happened? How the beginning of this occurred? And it's disheartening to see that the Chinese government has not learned anything since all of these outbreaks. It's so sad to see that they still are so secretive and still running this backwards ass 19th century rule of politics and the way they govern themselves, which is communism. I mean, in the year 2020, this is how a country operates, a major player in the world. They should have been upfront about this from the very beginning so we could have all tackled it together. Instead, the whole entire world economy is in ruins. Everybody's sheltered, hiding out in their houses like it's the Armageddon, and the most sick amongst us, the people who are at the most risk of this disease causing them severe complications or even death, are living a life filled with anxiety at this point. And it all could have been stopped, or at the very least stemmed, if the Chinese government would have let their fantastic and brave doctors alert the rest of the world. As late as January 11th, Wuhan's health authorities were still claiming there were just 41 confirmed cases. And that goes back to them being fearful and them being scared to report things up the chain of command. Because that's how it works in a communist government. That's how it works in China. If you're the local strongman, you're the local boss of the province, you don't want to tell your boss that you failed. You don't want to tell your boss that, we have this outbreak and we have no idea where it came from and people are developing this SARS-like pneumonia and dropping dead all over the place. That's not what you want to tell the head honcho in communism. You end up in a gulag somewhere. You end up in one of the concentration camps where they have the Uyghurs. That's where you end up. Because the Chinese government will stop at no length to save face. There is no road left untraveled when it comes to them saving face on a global level, because they have to project their power. They have to project their power on a global stage, and they can't show that something's going on in their country, that their economy is going to be smashed on, because that's what they were really hiding. Their biggest fear was that the rest of the world would see what was going on and completely close their borders down to China. And if they would have been honest, the rest of the world would have done so. Now, that does not mean the rest of the world would have abandoned China. America never abandons anyone in times of crisis. For all of our problems and all of the issues America has, and boy, do we have many, when it comes down to it, and there's a crisis somewhere in the world, America always shows up, and we always show up with the goodies. And the same would have happened in China. But their secretive government refused to accept the help when it was offered. Instead, they let this simmer until it turned into a 4-alarm fire with mass consequences around the world. I'm coming to you right now from Las Vegas, Nevada. And this is a very crazy time for us here. The largest employers in the state all shut down. Doors closed 30 days. People with fantastic union jobs who were living their best lives no longer than a couple of weeks ago are now in their houses, trapped inside, stuck with uncertainty. They don't know who they can count on. They don't know where to go to get the right evidence. You know, the legacy media has lied to us for so long. How do we know they're not lying about this? Because it's only two things. Either this is way more big of a situation than they're telling us, or it's nothing. And in this case, it's a much bigger problem than they let on from the very beginning. And that's why we find ourselves in the place where we find ourselves today. That's why this has grown exponentially. And that's why America is now leading the world in confirmed cases, because our leaders were playing games. Our leaders weren't paying attention. And our leaders were engaged in political tribalism at the detriment to those that they were elected by to protect and to serve. Instead, what did we get? More infighting, more name-calling, more political wrangling. Meanwhile, Rome was burning. These people who are in charge of our governments, they need to get it together. They need to be held responsible. There is no way on this earth that we should be at the point we're at in the United States right now with the way this is spreading. The most powerful nation on the planet with the most wealth ever amassed anywhere in any time period. And we didn't have the tests on hand. We weren't prepared for this when we saw it coming 3 or 4 weeks down the road. Our timeline for Italy has always been 9 to 14 days behind them. But yet, nobody paid attention. Nobody took it seriously. We had the president even on TV talking about, it's just the flu. You have irresponsible people like Sean Hannity spreading the same sort of nonsense. And then the people that follow them, that trust them, they take that at face value. Oh, I trust Sean Hannity. He's told me the truth before about politics. Well, you might think that's the case, but the fact is this. Sean Hannity is a partisan. Sean Hannity had one thing in mind when he was talking about this case. Sean Hannity only cared about the implications politically. He didn't care about the implications when it came to the rest of the whole entire picture. And that's what we have gotten time and time again from the pundits in this country. And on the other side, you have these pundits that get on TV every day and talk about the sky is falling. It's doom and gloom. Oh, we're not going to leave our houses for 2 years. Well, you're part of the problem as well. Because leading up to all of this, you folks were producing the same sort of articles. It's just the flu. Symptoms like the cold. You were more worried about what people were calling the virus, as opposed to stopping the virus. Where were you when the borders were closed? Oh, that's right. You were yelling and screaming that that's a bad idea. We had officials in New York City on February 2nd hugging and kissing people and telling people, "Oh, it's okay. It's no big deal. Don't be a bigot. Don't be a xenophobe. You can come and do what you always do. Come to our parade. Come to this. Come to that." Meanwhile, there was a silent outbreak erupting all the way around them. It has nothing to do with being a xenophobe or a bigot. It has to do with understanding what exponential growth means and what can happen in the face of a pandemic. And these so-called smart people, these so-called super intelligent Ivy League people who are in these positions of power in New York, know so much better than everybody else. Now, because of their irresponsible rhetoric, their irresponsible governance, New York City is the epicenter for this outbreak in the whole entire world. And that's a shame, folks, and it's sad. It didn't have to be this way. None of this had to be like this. We had the warning and we ignored it. The question is, going forward, are we going to make the same mistakes and ignore the professionals who are on the front lines? Or are we going to charge headfirst into this, not knowing what we're doing, and find ourselves in a very, very dark place? Thank you for listening to episode 1 of COVID-19, the epidemic that changed it all. I'll be back with another update in the next couple of days, and we'll move forward in the timeline, and we'll start talking about some of the more up-to-date news. I wanted to establish the beginnings of this outbreak on this first episode so that when we move forward, you understand my criticism of the Chinese government. I don't want it to seem like I'm coming out here and I'm kneecapping the Chinese people or I'm speaking in a derogatory fashion towards the people of China, because that is not my intention or my goal, and I will never do that. Like I said, the people of China, the doctors and the citizens who just went through this and who are still going through this, by the way, folks, don't believe that this is not still going on there. It is. They're just not testing it. Those people are heroes, and those people are brave. And those are the kind of people that are integral to us understanding what's coming down the pipe for us. So when I say don't listen to the Chinese government, that's what I mean. Make sure that if you can listen to the people on the ground and you can find access to the videos that came out of Wuhan from the very beginning of this, make sure you get on that and make sure you check those out. Because it's horrifying, folks. It's downright horrifying what happened in China. It is downright horrifying what those citizens went through. Because there is no way on this earth that the numbers that came out of China are correct. So going forward, we're going to do more updated news. We'll start doing the daily updates real time as the news is occurring, the updates for the day that we talk about it, and maybe a couple of days prior, depending on how often I'm pumping out this content. Like I said earlier, if you want more episodes like this and you want more content that has to do with COVID-19 and this pandemic, definitely let me know. You could do that at Bobbycapucci at protonmail.com. That's Bobbycapucci at protonmail.com. You can also find me on Twitter at BOBBY_CAPUCCI. All right, folks, I hope that you enjoyed this episode, and I look forward to this journey with you as we, navigate our way through the rest of this crisis. Since we're all stuck at home and we're all on lockdown, I figured, what the hell, what better time to launch my second podcast than now? I really appreciate all of you, and I hope that you all are staying safe. And honestly, folks, if you want this to end and you want us to go back to a normal semblance of life, then we all have to adhere to what the medical professionals are telling us. Don't listen to any of the politicians. That doesn't mean just Trump. That means all of them. Do not listen to any of them. Listen to the trusted medical professionals who do this for a living. All right? Not the economists, not the Wall Street Journal. People who are epidemiologists, virologists, people who study infectious diseases. Those are the people you want to be listening to. Those are the articles you want to be sharing. Because I'm certainly not a medical professional. You'll never hear any medical advice coming from me on this podcast, that's for sure. But what I will tell you is this. Information is very important. And it's very important that we keep ourselves educated throughout this as much as we possibly can. And it's hard to cut through the fat sometimes, right? It's hard to find sources that are reliable. So what I'll try and do is share sources that I come across, medical journals like the Lancet, like they were just discussing, and other journals that I use and try and use as sources. I'll try and pass that along to you as well as this podcast matures. If you have interest in any of that, please feel free to email me. And we will keep this going, and we'll try and navigate this together, and we'll try and keep ourselves company. Right? We'll try and keep ourselves company here on the podcast while we are locked down and figuring out what comes next. We might as well know what came before as we're waiting for what comes next, right? So with that said, I hope everybody is staying safe. I hope you all are staying in your homes and going out at minimal amounts of time. And more importantly, use this time to maybe reconnect with people that you had not talked to in a while. Reach out to them, Skype them, text them, whatever it may be. Because when we're isolated like this, and some people are isolated alone, it could have severe mental ramifications. And I would hate to see a spate of people having severe problems and suicides due to all of this. So maybe reach out to your friends. Maybe talk to people you haven't talked to in a while. Why not? It's not like we have much else to do. All right, everybody, I will be back in another couple of days, and we will start talking about what is going on now in regards to COVID-19, the pandemic that changed everything.